Hello, YouTubers. Joe Kersey here on Wednesday, February 26th at 10 till 5 in the afternoon Eastern Time. Now, today's journey into the absurd involves an article that was in the Daily Mail today. It was on their website. And I couldn't pass this one up. You know, this thing just cries out to be sort of deconstructed a bit. Let's see here. We'll hold it up here for you. Anesthesiologist who sexually assaulted 21 sedated patients is jailed for 10 years. And apparently this is a guy named, well, you can see his name, you know. It's all public now, so we can talk about it. This guy's out of Toronto, and he's been practicing since 1981. But he's only been known to have assaulted women for the last 4 years of his career. Oh, well, I guess he showed restraint earlier on, didn't he? Now, it seems what he was doing was after these people. Now, you couldn't really tell whether these people were truly under general anesthesia or whether it was some sort of, you know, epidural with a tube in controlling valve. It's hard to tell. But suffice it to say, later in the article, they say they couldn't move. So presumably they were, which presumably also meant they couldn't move their arms. So presumably they were actually having a, you know, at least nominally supposed to be having a general anesthetic of some variety. Although interestingly, perhaps not. Well, I suppose you could do it with the tube in. Yeah, you could slip that old hog in there alongside the tube, I guess. It seems what he would do is he would, you know, patient gets all draped off, and it sounds like a lot of these were during gynecologic procedures, whether you're doing hysterectomy, and almost all the, you know, the bulk of the attention would be devoted toward the pelvis. You know, they'd be looking down, away from him, and he'd apparently would get under the drapes, and he'd feel up their breasts, and he'd slip them the old hog in the mouth, you know, and seems that, you know, kissing, fondling, and oral sex. I guess he, at least he kissed them afterwards. I wonder if he phoned them the next day. I understand that some individuals really like the guy to call them the next day. He didn't even call me in the morning. So this is you know, this is what caught my attention. Now, in my professional life, which basically spans from 1972 to the present day, but certainly up to at least 1991, although I've heard, you know, I keep my ear to the ground. I've heard of 3 such cases. This is the third one. None of which I directly knew about, or even happened in the areas I was practicing. You know, in the cities in which I was practicing. But you read about these things, you hear about them, and my first question is what in the world was the operating room staff doing? You know, you've got, you know, circulating nurses in operating rooms, in my experience, are some of the most notoriously nosy, picky, interfering people in the universe. You know, at the same time, they're also quite helpful. You know, the good ones are very helpful. But, you know, this does not preclude the earlier part of that statement, I'll tell you that. So the idea that this guy was up there somehow slipping the hog into a patient's mouth during the case and not being observed is just beggars my imagination. I can't conceive of that. Although, I guess it has happened at least 3 times, at least that I'm, more or less aware of. Gosh, I guess unlike some guys that just turn on the ventilator and turn their back and read their newspaper or listen to their music, at least he was actually maintaining physical contact with the patient. That's a rarity nowadays. Let's say he's assessing their temperature. He's inserting his thermometer wand and taking an oral temp.
Making sure they're asleep.
Well. Now see, now Paul raises an interesting point because it sounds like a number of these people weren't really truly fully unaware. They weren't having pain and they couldn't move, but they had some degree of awareness of what was going on. Now the issue of awareness during general anesthesia is a very popular issue nowadays. And there's no question that from time to time it does happen. I probably did general anesthesia on around 20,000 people from like 76, to 1991 period. And I'm only aware of one patient that was somewhat aware of what was going on during the case. She wasn't in pain, but she could hear things. Now, this was a woman that had extreme sensitivity to anything. Basically 50% nitrous oxide was all she could tolerate. Otherwise, her blood pressure went to nothing. And so that's what she got, because you don't want to kill these people, do you? And the case was with a particularly loud, obnoxious surgeon who liked to tell all sorts of vulgar jokes and demean all the people around him, staff and the patient as well. He just loved the fact I was gay. That gave him fodder for, no end of material. And yes, well, FB, yes, the initials only here, since he's still alive and in town. And she said, well, I was hearing Dr. I said, oh my, well, of course, that's like, and I explained to her the circumstances. I said, were you hurting at all? She says, no, I wasn't hurting at all. She says, but I could hear Dr. She says, he's really loud and obnoxious, isn't he? And I said, yeah, he can be that way. So, it does happen, but it doesn't happen frequently, if you're doing it right. And so it sounds to me like, in addition to being profoundly unprofessional with these women, he was also being relatively incompetent too. If you're going to do that, at least make sure they're asleep. So, there are some. This guy looks like a real creep, doesn't he? Here, see, there's his picture. Well, of course, that's a mug shot. I don't think anybody looks their best when they're being, rounded into the government thug room and booked. One detail, of course, in Canada, they can't name people in the press the way they can here in the United States. But I guess in England they can't either. So the woman who can't be identified due to a publication ban went in for a hysterectomy in 2010. During the surgery, this individual fondled her breast, kissed her, and put his penis in her mouth, the court found. Now check out this. Now this guy, not only does it show lack of judgment in the operating room, it shows lack of judgment in the recovery room too, because when she was in the recovery room, this doc leaned in close to her and said, as soon as you were out, the first thing you reached for was my, and then he used a slang word for his penis. The first thing you reached for, the court found. He declined the opportunity to make a statement before he was sentenced. Then it says, most of the 21 victims took the stand. They gave generally similar accounts of being kissed and fondled by him and of having his penis placed in their mouths or hands. I guess he was into hand jobs as well. The woman testified they were conscious enough to be aware of what was happening, but were not able to move their limbs. Well, we've addressed those various issues already. It's just stop. I mean, I can't. Well, first of all, I mean, it would never even occur to me to do that. But just the logistics of every operating room I've worked in. You are on stage. I mean, you are on stage from the moment you walk into the room to the moment you leave, and then you're on stage in a hospital. And basically anything you do is going to be seen and talked about ad nauseum in the lounges and the halls and everywhere. It's astonishing that this guy was able to do this to that extent. Now, I'll tell you one. Having said that, I'll now go on to say, we had a fella. Well, the place I worked in Columbus, and this man was a very obese man. That doesn't quite cover it. He was well over 400 pounds. he had this really lucrative practice, because all of these people were fully insured, and all of these patients were very high dollar, high maintenance women that went to this really, really good gynecologist. I mean, this guy was a very, very good guy, and I took my mother to see him. That's how good he was. And the most decent guy you could ever hope to meet, and a very, very good surgeon. And but this guy, this fella, he had this guy do all of his anesthesia, and this man would fall asleep during cases. He had sleep apnea. He would sit in a chair and he'd get back and he'd get his big gut out like this, and he had a small television set that he would put on his stomach, and he would watch TV shows during the cases, and he would fall asleep during them. And I mean, everybody knew that was what was going on. Basically, nobody said squat about that for decades. Excuse me. Until at one point, somebody complained. I don't know who it was, but somebody complained, and it went to the medical staff. And did they kick him off staff? Did the fellow that did this gynecologist say, look, so and so, I can't have you do my cases anymore because you know, one of the requirements I like in an anesthesiologist is that they maintain. You don't want the patients to be aware, but you want the anesthesiologist to be aware during the case. Awareness should be on the part of the anesthesiologist, not the patient. And so what they did was, and that I happened to be chairman of the anesthesia department at that time. I guess I should have said something, huh? Although, everybody knew about it. We'd talk about it in this lounge. The president of the medical staff was a surgeon, and we'd talk about it openly in the lounge. So it's not like people weren't aware of this. And so I had to take this man down to the loading dock scales every week. They told him he had to lose weight. So every Friday afternoon, I would escort, this is very humiliating for the both of us, escort him down to the loading dock scales to be weighed. Because, a normal clinical scales, only goes up to 300 pounds. Yeah. It's like weighing a pallet of feed sacks. Actually his gut looked kind of like a pallet of feed sacks, stood on edge. Oh, it was sad. It was sad. But see, so stuff, outrageous stuff does go on and people are aware of it and people don't say anything, at least officially. Well, that's our journey into the one of the lesser known and probably more feared byways of medicine for today. So on that note, I'm going to say bye-bye, YouTube.